Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. What's up, everybody? It's a blessing to wake up in the morning. It's a blessing to have food to eat. And it's a blessing to be back to talk to all of you. Therefore, let me say welcome back to Backlit Cinema, the podcast. I'm your host, Zoe. That's Z-O or Z-O for those outside of the U.S. It's the 105th episode. Thank you for downloading and streaming. We really appreciate it. We watch movies that I loved when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I share these movies with my son, Zach, and I'll give you some of what he thought about the movie that we watched today. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbors, tell your Starbucks barista about our humble little show, Backlit Cinema, the podcast. Now, our show is coming in a little late again this week. And, it's still a time management issue, still working on that. And speaking of time management, let's not waste any more of your time talking about that. Let's go ahead and get into the movie that we watched this weekend. And that'll be after the little jingle, that'll be after the swoosh. So the movie that we saw this weekend was Iron Eagle. In Iron Eagle, a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, Colonel Masters, is shot down by a hostile nation over international waters. The government of the nation tries to convict him of violating their sovereignty. The U.S. government is slow to act, but the colonel's teenage son, Doug Masters, is not willing to wait for the U.S. to act. With his ragtag group of friends and a scrappy and brilliant Air Force pilot, Chappie Sinclair, they conspire to steal military secrets, fighter jets, and armament to rescue Doug's father from captivity. This movie was released on January 17th, 1986, produced by TriStar Pictures, Delphi Films, and Falcon's Flight. It grossed over $24 million in the U.S. and Canada on an $18 million budget, and it had poor reviews. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the critics section, and in the trivia section. There's a lot of interesting things. There are some things that you might think about this movie if you saw it when it originally came out that's not exactly true, but we're going to put that on the table and save it for later. This movie was starring Louis Gossett Jr. as Colonel Charles Chappie Sinclair. He's been in An Officer and a Gentleman, Enemy Mine, and Toy Soldiers. Currently he spends a lot of his time on the television. You may have seen him in pop up on some shows that you like. You may have seen him on the acclaimed HBO television series Watchmen. And many of the actors on this list have spent most of their time on television. But of all of these actors, Louis Gossett Jr. is definitely the most prestigious. As a matter of fact, he is, at the time that he was making these movies, or at the time that he made this movie, he was pretty much at the height of his prestige, so to speak. So moving right along, we have Jason Gedrick. You may have seen him in Backdraft, The Heavenly Kid, and he's been on the TV series Dexter. David Suchet. He played the Minister of Defense, Colonel Akir Nakish. He's been in Executive Decision, A Perfect Murder, and The Bank Job. Tim Thomerson. He played Colonel Ted Masters, and he's been in Uncommon Valor. I first seen him in Trancers, and you probably seen him in Air America. A wonderful character actor / leading man sometimes. Up next is Larry B. Scott. He played Reggie. He's been in Revenge of the Nerds, The Karate Kid, and you probably seen him in Black Jesus. Now, the funny thing about Larry B. Scott is as many times as I've watched this movie and I watched Revenge of the Nerds, I never put two and two together that this was the same guy that's playing both of these parts. I only recognize him when I recently watched this movie this weekend. When I looked at it, I was like, yeah, that's the guy. I know him from Revenge of the Nerds. Then we have Caroline Lagerfeld. She played Elizabeth Masters. She's been in Minority Report, Sweet Magnolias, and you've probably seen her on the TV series Gossip Girl. Another guy that I recognize is Jerry Levine. Same deal with Mr. Scott. Didn't recognize him all the times that I watched this movie and all the times that I watched the movie Teen Wolf. Jerry Levine played Tony. He's also in, when I say Teen Wolf, I'm talking about the original Teen Wolf that came out in the 1980s that starred Michael J. Fox. So not the current remake that's made into like a serious teen drama TV series that's out today. Actually, go check out the original Teen Wolf. It was a comedy when I was growing up. It was funny back in the day. It wasn't all teen angsty. Anyways, moving right along. Jerry Levine has also been in Born on the 4th of July and the movie K-9. And he has a robust directorial career. Robbie Rist played Milo. You've heard his voice in Balto, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 1990. He was Michelangelo. And you probably heard him in Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets. He started off as a live action actor, but his most notable roles are his roles as a voice actor nowadays. Michael Bowen played Notcher. He's been in Kill Bill Volume 1 as Buck, so still playing kind of a douchebag. Walking Tall in 2004 and Jackie Brown. Bobby Jacoby played Matthew Masters. He's been in Tremors, Pearl Harbor, and Can't Hardly Wait. Melora Hardin played Katie Masters. She's been in 17 Again, Hannah Montana the movie, and 27 Dresses. Finally, we have Michael Aldridge. He played Colonel Blackburn. He's been in Scarface and About Last Night. This movie was directed by Sidney J. Furie. He also directed Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Lady Sings the Blues from 1972. My aunties loved that movie. It's a very old school movie. It starred Billy D. Williams and Diana Ross. And he also directed Ladybugs from 1992. Written by Kevin Allen Elders and Sidney J. Furie. So Elders wrote Echelon Conspiracy, and I couldn't find anything else that he has written on. And Furie, he kind of writes his own movies, so he co-wrote this movie since he was directing it. And he also wrote A Dangerous Age, A Cool Sound from Hell, and The Boys in Company C. I'm not sure if he directed those, but he definitely wrote those. The music is by Basil Polidorus. We had talked about him before, and we had to have because he has 97 composer credits to his name. I probably told you that he also did the score for RoboCop, Les Miserables, and Flight of the Intruder from 1991. That's it for the opening credits. And if you're enjoying the show, please remember that you can get t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, face masks, jerseys, and more at our website, backclickcinema.com/shop. And when we come back, we're going to talk about our favorite parts. All right, I'm back. Talk about my favorite parts of the movie Iron Eagle. So there's a lot of nostalgia going on when you're watching older movies. When you're watching old movies, you get to see the old tech that you used to mess with when you were growing up. The stuff that seems so important and so advanced that are obsolete now. So another thing that I noticed is that there were things that we could do with the tech in the old days that it's almost impossible to do now. Like back in the day, if your TV ran on the fritz, you could actually take it to a repair shop and have it repaired. And in this movie, there's a scene where the main character, Doug Masters, is repairing his tape deck. It's like a little Walkman, his little Walkman tape. I don't know if it's a Sony Walkman, but it's a tape deck that's like a Sony Walkman, and, you know, plays audio cassettes. And so Doug is very industrious in repairing his gadgets and making special adaptations to his gadgets. So especially his Walkman, since for most of us, your little portable tape deck was like one of the most important devices that you could have as a teenager. So that was it. Basically kind of brought back memories of being able to repair your own devices, like open it. That's how a lot of kids got into engineering in the first place. They would open up their devices and make modifications or whatever devices they had, etc. It's very hard to do that nowadays. I remember my flat screen television went on the fritz, and I thought that I could just have it repaired like I would do a CRT, but you can't repair it. Well, you can repair your flat screen television, but it's so expensive that you might as well just buy a new one, as I've been told by a repair person. So, and I still had to pay for him to come to the house to even take a look at it. So that just looking at the movie just brought back memories of how he could, repair his stuff and modify his tape deck. And, I kind of noted that I didn't realize it at the time, but he had rich kid problems. So, there's a thing where he's challenged by this, rival to do this race. You can't really call him a bully because, you know, there's no way that the bully could actually outfight Doug Masters. So he's kind of like a troll and a nuisance and an annoyance. Just pestering Billy and Billy's gaggle of friends. Not Billy, I'm sorry, I'm saying the wrong name. Pestering Doug and his gaggle of friends. So I say there's rich kid problems because the bully, well, like I said, it's not really a bully. It's kind of just this troll kid. So the troll kid is Notcher. So Notcher is challenging Doug Masters to go on this weird race. So Doug has a plane and his friends have a plane. That's where these rich kid problems come in. And Notcher has like a cross motorbike, and they're supposed to race through this canyon. And the challenge is that Doug has to stay below a certain altitude and fly and try to beat Notcher on his motorcycle across the finish line. And, you know, they have to stay on a particular path or whatever. It's a weird race. I'm picking up on a lot of things that I didn't pick up on when this movie first came out. So, and a reminder, I watched this movie multiples of times. I watched this movie many times, and I just took it as, okay, that's normal, but it's not normal, for kids to race each other on airplanes and motorcycles. But that's what happened in this movie. So in this particular race, they're racing. The plane is racing against the motorcycle, and Doug has to be adept at flying. So he doesn't crash the plane because he has to fly so close to the ground and so close to the mountains, and he has to push the plane. This is not a particularly fancy plane or a particularly fast plane, and it's in a situation where it's conceivable that the motorcycle can beat him, but he's actually gaining on the motorcycle, and he's starting to win the race. And then something goes wrong with his plane. Apparently his cap comes off, and his plane is like dumping oil, and his plane is smoking. And one of his adversary's friends are in another plane. So the other plane is supposed to monitor his plane and monitor the race overall. So they're both enforcing the rules and monitoring the race. And so the adversary's friend is in his friend's plane, And when Doug's friends find out that something's wrong with his plane, they threaten to beat up the adversary, and the adversary, not the adversary, but the adversary's friend. And the adversary's friend snitches immediately. Like, he doesn't put up a brave front. Like, I'm not giving you nothing. I'm not going to tell you nothing. Or, haha, too bad what happened to your friend Doug. He's going to crash the plane. But no, it's more like he immediately snitches on what happened, on who told him to do what, and basically sabotage the plane and threaten Doug's life so that his friend could win the race. I thought that was interesting. It was an interesting profile of how some kids live. I also noted that so in the very beginning of the film, that's where we see that Doug Master's father was shot down. And what I noted about that is that it seemed to me that he's shot down over another nameless countries. So in movies like Top Gun, or a lot of military movies, especially around the 1980s, whenever there was some kind of a movie about military action, they would usually be over a Middle Eastern country. Like in the early 80s, it was clearly Russia, but then after the Gulf War, I don't even know, like it was actually even before the Gulf War, because before the Gulf War, you had a lot of terrorist attacks on U.S. embassies or just airplanes. Usually it'd be like a terrorist group would hijack a plane, and they're usually from the Middle East. And then after like some negotiation or whatever, the terrorists, they would either capture the terrorists or the terrorists would let the plane go or something. It would always be kind of resolved in some kind of way, and it wouldn't go on forever. But so I think it is for this reason that they would choose a Middle Eastern country, but they would never name the Middle Eastern country. They would just choose some nameless country. And that's where Doug Masters' father was shot down. So Colonel Masters was flying in international airspace. At least it's airspace that the U.S. and basically every other country considers international. But this country decided that it's not international space, it's their airspace. And they sent planes up to intercept Colonel Masters, and they shot him down. So news will get back to home and cause, complications or repercussions. Basically, it's the event that sets off the events of the movie. So there are some other things I noticed. They had some nerd dances at the high school, and it's at the nerd dance that Doug finds out that his father's been captured by the Middle Eastern government. He goes to this colonel to try to find out, because they're on a military base. He's the son of a respected airman, fighter pilot. And so he has a limited amount of access to people that he can talk to. So he's able to talk to one of his father's friends, who's also colonel, who's also involved with maybe trying to do something to bring his father home. And the colonel's able to give him some information that he's not able to give, release publicly. What I noticed about the colonel, he's like slightly undressed. I think this is kind of a trope in Hollywood movies where you have officers with their in a slight state of undress while they're at work. And me having been in the military, this is only a slightly irksome, because this is not how, for one thing, I know this is not how the military wants to be portrayed. For the other thing, you don't have officers walking around in a state of undress while they're working. This is a weird trope that they like to do in Hollywood. and we all kind of wish they would stop. The other thing that goes on is that because of Doug's incredible amount of privilege that Doug has, he's able to get some time on this $1 million video game. It's a aircraft simulator. So they allow him to fly in his aircraft simulator. And that's basically all of this that we're seeing is to set you up for later on in the movie, because you can't just take a teenage kid and just throw him in a fighter jet and have that be believable. So in order to enhance that, we get a lot of flashback scenes of him and his father. His father would sneak Doug onto the plane disguised as another pilot. And then he would allow Doug to fly the plane from the controls in the rear seat. He would allow Doug to fly a fighter plane. And then somehow he's able to give Doug access to a fighter plane simulator. So Doug actually has some ability to fly a fighter plane. I think it's an F-16. So that basically is designed to set up him flying the plane later on in the movie. None of this is 100% plausible, but Hollywood is doing its best, and they're doing their best. And you got to appreciate the earnestness with it and how they try to stretch, plausibility in this movie. And, like I said, it's something I noticed. And maybe this is why most audiences didn't like it, because it was, it's one thing to be a little bit far-fetched, but this was like all the way far-fetched, I guess. I think for a lot of people, it was just too much to ask them to believe. It's not like it's like The Last Starfighter, which is all science fiction. The Last Starfighters have a similar premise where you find a teenage kid who is good at pretend flying. So since he's good at pretend flying, they put him in a real fighter spaceship and they take him off to a different solar system to fight a real war. And that's easier to buy since it's all fiction anyway. But this is supposed to be grounded in a little bit, at least in reality. And we're seeing some unrealistic stuff happening in this movie. And I love how Hollywood is trying its darndest to make it believable. Eventually, Doug is doing everything he can to try to get the military or the government to, formulate a plan to bring his father home. But the relationship between the U.S. and this unnamed Middle Eastern country is complicated. So they can't just go on and rescue him right away. They don't want to engage in military action. It's almost like they're willing to just let the country do with Doug's father as the country wants to do. Eventually, the country decides they want to execute his father for essentially trespassing. And, Doug finds out about it and he's like, he's just doing everything he can. It's like he kind of gives up on the government and he decides he's going to try to do it himself. And he's able to convince this colonel. He actually met the colonel before, dressed in civilian clothing, working on his plane before the race. And later on, he finds out that this guy isn't a mechanic. He's actually a fighter pilot and a colonel in the Air Force Reserve. So this Air Force Reserve officer is convinced by Doug Masters to come up with a plan to rescue his father. And basically, the colonel is telling him, like, well, if you can come up with this stuff, then I can make this plan. And Doug gets his friends together and they're like a Scooby-Doo gang, or maybe you can think of them as a larger group of the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. Is like just a giant group of clever kids, and all of their parents obviously work in a military base, and because they all live on the base, and all of their parents have important military functions and have access to the jets. They have access to fuel. They have access to plans and all this other stuff. They have access to secrets. So the kids steal the secrets and the equipment from their parents. They're able to put forth false orders and false paperwork so they can requisition the planes and their armament. They're able to do all of this just with kid know-how, just basically stealing stuff and faking stuff from their parents. And they're able to get this stuff. And then, the colonel, there's Colonel Chappie, played by the magnificent Louis Gossett Jr. Just gotta love how Gossett just delivers his lines. It's like he has a certain cadence that's commanding and at the same time comforting and demands respect. And we see a lot of that in many of his movies, especially when he's playing like a military officer. It's very impressive. I think the most impressive he was in the movie, An Officer and a Gentleman. That's where it's like, it really comes through. But it also comes through in this movie to a certain degree. So Chappie, as played by Louis Gossett Jr., Chappie he wants to get a feel for Doug Masters. He wants to make sure that Doug Masters is ready, but he realized that Doug Masters will never be like, Doug Masters is like, he's determined that he's going to fly a fighter plane over to the Middle East and rescue his father. Chappie is convinced that Doug isn't ready because nobody's really ready. And then, he basically shows Doug this book of a bunch of young men, and Doug is like, who are these young men? It's like a scrapbook or a photo album. Ask your parents what those are. So so Chappie shows him this photo album, and Doug is flipping through this photo album of all these young men, these young fighter pilots. And Doug is like, so who are these guys? And Chappie says, they're all dead. These are all the men that I had led into battle in the war. And these are the ones that have passed away. They're all dead. And that's how you have to realize that you're not ready, because you could be one of them. This could happen to you. And I think Chappie shows Doug this book to see if he was really committed. And he had talked about how their guts were scattered throughout the Pacific. So he was, and that it was one of the reasons why he didn't actually want to engage with Doug in trying to do this weird rescue in the first place, because of the possibility that they could just go out there just to get shot down and killed. So the middle of the movies it's kind of like The Goonies and Top Gun, the Goonies plus Top Gun, because there are some training sequences. And another thing you learn is that Doug cannot, he functions better when he's listening to heavy metal music as he's flying the plane. So as he's flying the plane, Chappie tells Doug to turn off the music, and they're supposed to hit some practice targets, and Doug can't hit the targets. And he says he has to listen to his music. So he turns on his heavy metal music, and he's able to hit all of the targets. So that's his process of hitting the targets. Now, if he ever gets the chance to go to the Air Force Academy and actually learn how to fly a plane, they're gonna train that out of him. But as of now, Chappie's gonna allow him to play his music while he flies his fighter plane. One of the best parts of the movie is whenever Chappie is speaking, but the best part is obviously it's going to be the inspirational ready for it speech. Like, are you ready for it? He does an outstanding job with this speech. It's nice and fulfilling. It's one of my favorite parts. So after the middle part there, you get to the second act. You get to the final act of the movie of them going over. So it's Chappie and Doug. They both have their own planes that they were able to steal from the Air Force. And when I say steal, basically they forged paperwork to make it look like that they got orders to take these planes. Doug Masters is impersonating an Air Force pilot and disguising himself as best he can to look like he's a 22-year-old as opposed to being I guess he's 18, as opposed to being 18 years old. And he's helped with he's got the flight suit, the helmet on, the visor is down, so it kind of obscures what he looks like. So he's able to obscure his identity. And they didn't have a lot of the tech that we have now to verify somebody's identity. So that's one of the things to his advantage that makes it even slightly believable that they're able to steal these fighter jets. So they got the fighter jets, they got the fuel, they got refueling planes, like their orders include places, coordinates where they go to refuel the plane, because you can't fly fighter jets all the way from California to the Middle East. You have to refuel at some time. And then after their last refueling, they're scheduled for another refueling, but they deviate from the course, and this is where they actually steal the plane, because their planes don't include going into a hostile nation to rescue Doug's father. Their orders don't include, the fake orders that they wrote don't include that. So when they deviate from the course, they basically start ignoring I guess whoever they're talking to, whatever officials that they're talking to at whatever Air Force installation, to try to get them to get back on course. They stop talking to them and they continue on to the hostile Middle Eastern nation. So they get there, they start shooting the place up with the planes, and then they got dogfights with other planes. This is all very exciting and thrilling. It's not, I noticed, not as good as what was done in Top Gun, which is another mark against it, is why Top Gun was so much more successful than this movie, because whatever, I guess I could talk a little bit about this before I get into the trivia, because I don't think I wrote this part, but Top Gun had a lot more support from the U.S. military than Iron Eagle, because the thing that, like, the military would have given their support, but the minute they described how the kids are going to steal secrets from or steal planes and armament from the U.S. Air Force, that part of the plot did not sit well with the U.S. military, so they withdrew their support. So they don't have a lot of support from the U.S. military when they made this movie. So the dog fights don't look as authentic as they look in Top Gun. They don't look, and a lot of it has to do with the director and cinematography and all the other things that go into movie making. So they had dog fights in Iron Eagle, and while I was younger, I thought they were awesome. But when I look at it now, I see that they don't stand up to the contests that were shown in Top Gun. So in the midst of all of this fighting, Chappie gets shot down. Before they even left, Chappie gave Doug a tape. He told Doug to play the tape. If anything happens to Chappie, Doug is supposed to play this tape. Now, what's interesting is that Chappie had made this tape because Doug has a fondness for listening to his music on his tape recorder. Now, obviously, there's no tape deck inside of an F-14. So what Doug had done, and Doug had been doing this for a while, like he had this contraption had made up. He wears it everywhere because Doug's car doesn't have a tape deck. So he made a contraption that he could strap to his leg that holds his tape deck. And so he can strap it to his leg and he can play his tape deck while he's flying the fighter plane. Chappie gives him this tape. Doug puts in the tape, and it's Chappie basically coaching him through the rest of the mission, because Chappie's gone down. Chappie can't finish the mission. So Doug gets to listen to this tape with Chappie encouraging him and reminding him of the mission parameters and things of that nature. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize this film as having the magical Negro trope, with Colonel Chappie Sinclair being that magical Negro. I talked about it in other earlier podcasts, but with the magical Negro trope, it's that you have the black co-star is actually improving and developing the character of the white main character. Interestingly, in this version, Chappie dies, but you still hear Chappie's voice. I think they got some inspiration from Star Wars. And Star Wars, where Obi-Wan dies earlier in the film, Luke can still hear Obi-Wan's voice through the Force. So in this movie, they don't have a Force, but they have Chappie creating a tape so that Doug can listen to Chappie's voice. It's very Star Wars-esque. But So that's the magical Negro trope, and that yeah, in this trope, the black character helps out the white character, the white main character, but the black character isn't truly developed. It basically there's no character development. He basically starts and ends the same, where he's improving the white character, and the white character goes through a full character arc. In this movie, it's not really a full character arc. He just but it's some development. He goes through some development. But nevertheless, I still like this movie because back in the day when I saw it, I didn't know or understand the magic Negro trope, but I see that as a step that Hollywood took to include more black actors in movies. But anyways, being coached by this tape, Doug is able to find his father. He's able to land the plane and rescue his father. This is all very not how you do a rescue. You don't do it with fighter planes. Just don't. It's not how it's done. Like 99% of the times when you effect a rescue, you would use a military helicopter. You would use a helicopter because they're especially, and you would use, if you have planes, you would use the planes as cover because a helicopter can easily land and easily take off. They do it vertically, believe it or not. A plane needs a runway. It needs a long, flat, level ground. And he was fortunate enough to have a long, flat, level ground where he could land the plane and then get his father up. And then he basically created a firewall to obscure the view by the enemy to see what he was doing. And then he's able to get his father on the plane and then take off again. So that's what happened, as implausible as that was. Still thrilling to look at when you're a child. So, and then he goes through some more dogfighting. The Ministry of Defense, the Minister of Defense, he decides that he's going to take down this rascal himself. So he orders one of his pilots to come down. He kicks that pilot out of the plane and takes his plane, and he goes up in the air, and they have their dogfight, and Doug Masters wins, obviously. And then they try to get away, but then the country, the hostile country, sends more fighter planes, and it's way more than Doug Masters can take on. And even if he could, he does not have the armament. He's almost out of ammunition. I think he used up most of his missiles, and he basically is down to his 50 millimeter guns, or whatever millimeter those guns are. I don't remember. Anyways, it doesn't matter. He just got his guns down, and it's not going to be enough. And just as, things are starting looking dicey, there's a whole squad. What do you call a group of planes? You call them a squad of planes? Squadron of planes. A squadron shows up, and they basically scare off the other planes from the enemy planes from the Middle Eastern nation, and they escort Doug's plane to safety to the Mediterranean Sea, which they call it the Med. We're going to take you back to the Med. And I thought that was so charming that the Mediterranean Sea is referred to as the Med. So they take him back to the Med to safety. And they do the missing man formation for Chappie Sinclair, which is all touching and whatnot. And then when they get back to when they get back to America, I guess, Doug is surprised that Chappie Sinclair is alive, that yes, his plane was shot down, but I guess he was able to bail out of his plane and he was rescued. So everything's all right with Chappie. I told you they were using the magical Negro trope. So they have to face a hearing. It's not exactly a court martial, but it is a hearing in front of a bunch of generals and all of the things that they did. And the angle they took is that the Air Force is too embarrassed that a bunch of kids stole secrets. So they don't want to have a trial and have this stuff get out to anybody. So instead they let them go. That was the thing. They let them go. Now in real life, obviously everybody that was involved would be punished severely. All the kids would be, I don't know about putting kids in jail, but it would be something like that. The kids would be put in some kind of detention situation, and their parents would have been court-martialed, and Chappie would have been court-martialed. Everybody would have had a bad ending. But I'm thinking of this as a kids movie. So this is the kids movie. Basically nothing happens, and Chappie's they let him, like the Air Force decides to let him go on the condition that they don't say anything to anybody. And Chappie Sinclair at that moment convinces them to allow Doug to go to the Air Force Academy. So not only is Doug not punished, but he is rewarded for his actions, which is interesting. It's a feel-good ending. Everybody hugs each other, and that's pretty much the whole movie. And Louis Gossett Jr. signs on to star in like 3 more Iron Eagle movies that go direct to video. So yeah, that was Iron Eagle. That was it was a charming movie. It's like, I would say that it probably doesn't age particularly well, given that but people didn't like it back then. So it's kind of hard to say that it didn't age well, because people didn't even like it back then. It was like too many elements that were hard to believe. But I don't know. I couldn't help it. I truly enjoyed this movie. Zachary liked the movie, even though I think he recognized some of the more fantastical elements of it, but he did enjoy it. So that's it for our favorite parts. And now let's go to the trivia. And now we're back with the trivia. So the trivia we got, as usual, from IMDb. I didn't cross-reference it with anything. So just take it how it is. It's IMDb. They're doing the best they can. And it's interesting anyways. So during the snake scene, so the snake scene is the race. They have to race this, I guess they call it the Snake Mountain race. I'm not exactly clear, but in this trivia they call it the snake scene. So during the snake scene, in which Doug Master races his Cessna 150 against a motorcycle riding knocker, the pilot of the Cessna 150 Aerobat was renowned aerobatic pilot Art Skoll. He was killed later that year when his Pitts S2 camera plane crashed while filming in-cockpit footage of the flat spin sequence in Top Gun from 1986. The character of Colonel Charles Chappie Sinclair was inspired by real-life U.S. Air Force General Daniel Chappie James Jr. General Chappie James was a member of the famed all-black Tuskegee Airmen and also flew fighter jets in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. He later became the first black 4-star general in U.S. history. According to the DVD liner notes, the U.S. Air Force was going to consult on this film until they realized that a major part of the plot hinged on Doug and his friends hacking into the base computers, stealing equipment, etc. They didn't like the idea of the ease at which they had control of the base. The film was originally intended to be released in the summer of 1986, but the release was pushed up to January to avoid competition and confusion with Top Gun. In some scenes, some of the audiences carried on the F-16s was real rather than props. At one point during filming, the Israeli Air Force, IAF, was called upon to carry out a strike against terrorist targets in Lebanon. A ground controller saw a pair of IAF F-16s already in the air with the required loadout and vectored them toward the target. They were halfway to the target when someone realized that the aircraft had been ordered to attack were attached to the film shoot, and that the planes were embezzled with American markings and insignia. They were recalled from the strike in time to avoid an international incident. So All that is to say that the Israeli Air Force supplied planes for the movie. The Israeli Air Force had their actual Air Force planes repainted to look like American Air Force planes. And the planes were sent, because they were real Air Force planes, Israeli Air Force planes, they were ordered to do the strike in Lebanon. And then they realized that these planes were for a movie and they had American markings on it. So they didn't want planes looking like American planes going on to do a strike against Lebanon, because that wouldn't be a good look. That would look really, really bad. So they were recalled just in time. Up next, all of the fighter aircraft used were Israeli Air Force aircraft, repainted with the U.S. Air Force symbol and fictitious enemy symbol. So not only did the Israeli Air Force play the U.S. Air Force, but they also played the enemy Air Force. This movie is Johnny Lawrence of Cobra Kai and Karate Kid's favorite movie, and he is featured watching it on several episodes of Cobra Kai. So that's pretty funny. I haven't watched Cobra Kai since the first season. I should probably get back into that. The name of the country in which Colonel Masters is being held prisoner is never mentioned. Only the cities of Baliyad and Il Karim, and that the country is considered a pariah nation in the Middle East. In the opening sequence of the film, it established that Doug Masters, played by Jason Gedrick, drives his vintage Mustang as hard as he flies and ignores the speed limits on the Air Force Base where he goes to school. But MPs on American military installations have always been fanatical about enforcing speed limits and citing anyone who violates them. The MPs in Masters Base would have had the boy paying off a small fortune in speeding tickets and barred him from driving on the base if he had been that glib about driving that way on a military installation. And his father would have been called to the carpet for failing to enforce that discipline with one of his dependents. So what I was going to mention, I thought I copied this from the thing. Anyways, what I was going to mention is that I found out that this movie, Iron Eagle, actually came out before Top Gun. For most of my life, I thought that Iron Eagle was a Top Gun clone. It is not. It actually came out a few months before Top Gun. And as you heard me read in the trivia, they actually moved the date to come out before Top Gun to avoid confusion. Not only did it come out before Top Gun, but it was more expensive to make than Top Gun. So this movie had a budget of $18 million. I think Top Gun had a budget of between $16 and $17 million. So this movie was more expensive and it made way less money than Top Gun. And it's just a coincidence that this movie and Top Gun is about fighter planes, and the context is completely different. But you can see how some people would think that this is a Top Gun clone, because even though they spent more money, it looks cheaper. It doesn't have as prestigious an actor as Tom Cruise. Even at that time, he was a mega superstar. And really, Top Gun had like I said, they had the support of the U.S. military, where Iron Eagle didn't. And Top Gun just looks better. It just overall just looks better. It feels better. It has Kenny Loggins on the soundtrack, and Iron Eagle does not, right? So yeah, in every way, shape, or form, Top Gun far exceeds Iron Eagle, even though it costs less to make. So that's it for the trivia. And up next, we'll see what the critics thought. And we're back. Let's check out what the critics thought. Interestingly enough, usually I get the critics' thoughts from Rotten Tomatoes, but Rotten Tomatoes didn't have anything on this movie. So I ended up finding the critics' thoughts on Metacritic, but I still have the Rotten Tomatoes score. So on Rotten Tomatoes, the score among critics was 20%, and among audiences, it was 57%. It's like they're in conjunction. They're in agreement that this movie was not great. And honestly, I cannot blame them. I can't say that they're wrong. So as I said, the thoughts that I got from them, I got from Metacritic. And, so we'll start with Janet Maslin from the New York Times. She wrote, Iron Eagle is a very shrewd teenage variation on the Rambo / missing in action formula, a military rescue mission with a nice young hero and a fun-loving feeling. That's pretty good. That's probably my main feeling when I first watched this movie, and it continues to this day. Up next is Salam Alaton. He wrote from the Globe and Mail, the vulgarity and jingoism of Iron Eagle prevented from functioning even as breezy entertainment. Which is kind of a weird thing to say, since it's a movie about kids stealing military secrets and equipment to go rescue a man's father. Like, they didn't really care about the politics of the movie. It's just about rescuing this dude's father. It didn't feel overly jingoistic, especially with them stealing stuff. And you could kind of say that about any military film anyway. Up next is Bill Cosford from the Miami Herald. He wrote, once you get past the initial hurdles, Iron Eagle has the kind of sappy charm and variety of overblown performances that shapes kids' movies. It's not plausible for a second, but neither, on the face of it, was Bambi. That's pretty good. That's actually more positive than Janet Maslin's reviews, and he's exactly right. Once you understand that this is a kid's movie, then it goes down easier. Finally, we have Robert Blau from the Chicago Tribune. He wrote, despite a few interesting moments, Iron Eagle looks and sounds like an extended television commercial that encourages young people to be all they can be in a supersonic fighting machine. I guess. Yeah. It looks like that. I'm gonna have to agree with him a little bit. Finally, Iron Eagle is, as of this recording, available on HBO Max. That's it for today. Next week, we have a chat about another great movie from yesteryear, Constantine. Follow us on Twitter or TikTok at Backlick Cinema, or on Facebook or Instagram at Backlick Cinema Podcast. And if you're on Mastodon, at Backlick Cinema at mstdn.party. Don't forget that you can contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlickcinema.com. One last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlick Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. Be safe. Share a movie from yesteryear with your loved ones. Hug your family. And if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.